It should be no surprise that I've got a soft spot for arcade racing games at this point. I've already covered some of my favourites and randomly brought up the many others I love throughout my videos. Burnout, Need for Speed, Forza Horizon, Midnight Club. Most of these games helped shape my childhood and my love for racing games in general. I might not be much of a car person, I can't tell the difference between drivetrain and differential, that's an exaggeration, I totally can, I just wanted that fancy alliteration. But the act of driving cars in video games has always been fun, even when the game is kinda crummy. The aforementioned games? I loved them unconditionally as a child, and I still love them now as an adult. But there was another game I grew up with, a game that very few people seem to remember in this day and age, likely due to its terrible name that obliterates its chances of being found in search engines for sharing a name with an everyday commodity. Fuel. An off-road oriented arcade racing game that hyped itself up as having the biggest open world in a video game, then just kinda came and went. Fuel was published by Codemasters, then known for the Race Driver and Colin McRae Dirt series, and developed by Asobo Studios, who have a really funny history actually. They started out making licensed stuff like Ratatouille and Garfield 2, but recently they've been responsible for the critically acclaimed Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and A Plague Tale: Innocence. How do you end up here after doing something like this?
No, really, this is too much. Then again, no, you're right. I'm the best of all.
Ew! Ew, that's gross. Ew, lazy eye. Ew.
Unlike the previously mentioned racing games, however, while I did kind of grow up with Fuel, I definitely didn't love it. If anything, it was more like an abusive relationship. It had everything I always wanted. A huge open world, more content than you could shake a cursed PS2 Garfield model at, and a post-apocalyptic setting. It sounded too good to be true. And unfortunately it was. It roped me in with its charming allure and beat me over the head with a frying pan when I dared question its intentions or showed any less than unwavering devotion. And I should have left, but gosh dang it, I just kept crawling back. There really was nothing like it on the market, and even now it's hard to say there is. Fuel is a game I desperately want to love, and it gets points for being ambitious, but those ambitions, the things that end up making Fuel, are what end up holding it back. Fuel is pretty unceremonious from the start. Aside from the cool looking cutscene before the title screen, there's no real context for anything apart from the main premise, which is a shame because it's got a dumb but really cool premise that could have been heightened with a bit more effort. Basically, global warming has finally claimed the Earth. Forests are permanently scorched. Storms ravage the skies. Cities are submerged beneath the rising sea level, take that Ben Shapiro. And tornadoes fling abandoned cars across the countryside like a streamer with their keyboard in a heated gamer moment. And what do you think is the appropriate response to this? To take beat up old buggies and muscle cars out into the unlivable conditions of the eastern United States and, well, race, of course. It's so absurd that it loops back around and ends up being cool again, but unfortunately Asobo just don't do a lot with the concept, to the point where it usually feels indistinct from other off-road racing games from that time. And the first big disappointment, emphasis on big, is the map itself. Now don't get me wrong, this is impressive. Fuel's open world holds, or at least held, the record for largest playable area in a console game. 5,500 square miles, or 14,400 square kilometers, roughly the size of Connect-Die-Cut. Just for comparison, Forza Horizon 5 has the largest map in the series, and that's only 41 square miles. Even The Crew 2, whose map represents a truncated version of the entirety of the United States, sans Alaska and Hawaii, is only around 2,000. So tiny, just unplayable. And the game really wants you to revel in the size of it too, with multiple challenges and collectibles requiring particularly long treks across the countryside, and achievements for driving from one corner of the map to the other. And it's all the more impressive as you'll never encounter a loading screen while out roaming the open world, unless you fast travel or reset your vehicle. The thing is though, that the maps for Forza and The Crew were both handcrafted. The roads, most of the objects you find, they were all placed deliberately. Imagine doing that for a game as large as Fuel though, and you'll understand why instead of placing down every road themselves, the developers opted to have the map somewhat procedurally generated using pre-made tiles, before going back in and tweaking some of the areas to have more deliberately designed tracks and landmarks. This is entirely understandable, but it results in a world that's really dull to drive through most of the time, especially considering how few unique environments there are. There are 19 zones in Fuel, and you'd think that they'd all at least be somewhat different from each other. But in a lot of cases you're going to be weaving through the same looking burning forests and overgrown plains no matter which zone you're in. There are unique areas to be found, for sure. There's a shipwreck in the top left corner, there are the sprawling canyons to the south, the salt flats to the northeast that seem to go on forever, there's an area overlooking a submerged city, and there's a massive flooded crater in the center of the map, and so on and so forth. And to its credit, the sheer sense of scale you get at times is nothing short of incredible. The volcano in Forza Horizon 5 is cool and all, but mountains in Fuel aren't just tall hills, they're fucking mountains. Aside from those and a few other unique areas though, about 99% of the map is forests, plains, and sand. The final zone being a towering snowy mountain would have been sick. If only we didn't get a separate snowy mountain to explore a dozen or so hours earlier. It also doesn't help that there's not a lot to actually do in the open world, or at least not much of any substance. Like, there is a lot to do, content-wise. You can find barrels of fuel which act as currency, but also each zone is home to several collectibles, including liveries to slap on your vehicles, most of which are hideous beyond compare, and vista points to contemplate. Yes, allow me to contemplate this brown smudge off in the distance. Pokemon Legends Arceus finally has some competition. These aren't marked on your map at first, but will show up once you get close enough, or you can just chase down one of the Doppler trucks that show up after beating races in that zone, as they'll mark them on your map for you. From there, it's pretty much just a matter of fast traveling to the nearest helipad, then beelining for it. 95 Vista points, 144 liveries, and 57 Doppler trucks to find is quite a bit of content, but because of how plain and repetitive the scenery is, these collectibles are rarely placed in creative ways. Say what you want about the bonus boards sitting on top of buildings in Horizon 5, they may be a pain in the ass to get, but at least they're somewhat creative. Most collectibles here are usually just sitting out in the open or require you to spend 20 minutes driving around a mountain or something, and the ones that do feel deliberately placed are incredibly frustrating to get due to some frustrating physics that make driving up the sides of hills and mountains more annoying than it needs to be. There are like maybe 2 cars out of 74 well suited for climbing rough terrain, but arbitrarily a bunch of vehicles that look like they'd be real good for the job end up being horrible. Heck, it's so bad that sometimes you'll be on a dirt bike and stuck revving at 45 k's an hour going up an incline as steep as your mum's ass when she's laying down on her stomach. But yeah, it's ultimately a lot of tedium for not much in return. So what else is there to do in Fuel? Well, no one's playing online anymore, obviously, and the race editor is just plonking checkpoints down on the map and hoping they form a coherent route. Spoiler alert, they won't. So that leaves the real meat and bones, the career and challenge modes. Each zone has 3 or 6 races to complete, and you'll earn a star for each difficulty you complete it on, up to 3 per race. Races themselves are worth fuel used to buy new vehicles, but they also reveal the location of Doppler trucks and unlock new clothing for your initially bare-chested guy. Because in post-apocalyptic America, not only are women extinct, but you have to earn the right to wear a shirt. You'll need a certain number of stars to unlock the next zone's base camp and its events, and this is where things start to get a little tedious. Right from the outset, it becomes apparent that you'll need to replay events to get more stars to progress. The very first zone requires 4 stars to beat, but there are only 3 races in it, so you'll have to tough it out on a higher difficulty right from the get-go. The issue with this approach is that these aren't really proper difficulties. Rather, they just change what vehicles you're up against. You'd think picking the hardest difficulty would mean just having to contend with some challenging AI, but instead it throws you against faster vehicles from that class, so in many cases winning the highest difficulty straight up is flat out impossible, and they feel less like different difficulties and more like whole separate events on their own. So no matter what, you will have to play these races repeatedly. I don't really like this approach because A, there are only a total of 72 events in the career, which feels like they're not utilizing as much of the map as they could considering how vast it is, and B, makes this game kind of inaccessible for a lot of players. It was probably asking too much, but I would have preferred if they had more unique races that you only needed to beat once, maybe twice at most, but I guess also making you race the same route multiple times is a cost-effective measure, and racing games are often built on that staple anyway. The track design itself? Not bad. There are some really fun circuits and point-to-point races here and there, and these races also do a good job at honing in on the more unique areas of the game, so it doesn't feel too repetitive despite the need for repeating events. This is also where the extreme weather comes into play, and sometimes it's exhilarating. There are 2 events where you race while dodging a fleet of tornadoes, which not only are they obstacles themselves, but they also destroy some of the scenery around you and fling debris at you to try and take you out. Genuinely really freaking cool, but they only use it twice. Such a fun concept and they just don't use it that much. Like, imagine if Pokemon said, hey, check out our cool creature battling RPG, but then you spend 98% of the time wandering around getting into punch-ups with trainers instead. I mean, to be fair, if a Pokemon game gave me the opportunity to punch the shit out of Paul, I'd be all over it, but still. There are also events with fierce thunderstorms and blizzards, and there's also this one event in the middle of a dust storm. Screw being able to see, who the hell needs that? But like, man, these days games like Drive Club have extreme weather covered, but back in 2009 when I first played this was sick. Outside of those events, the highlights for me were the races that take place near the base camps most of the time. Racing through a shipwreck, across the roofs of skyscrapers buried by desert sands, on a massive satellite dish at the top of Mount Rainier, these were mostly pretty solid, even if they often required me to use ATVs, aka the vehicles that feel like they're driving across a frozen lake 100% of the time. Why do they drift so wide, dude? Ah, heck it, now's probably a good time to talk about the vehicles and physics anyway. It's the definition of mixed bag, like the half chocolate bars, half rusted nails kind of mixed bag. There are a bunch of vehicle types. You've got your ATVs, dirt bikes, road bikes, dirt buggies, monster trucks, big rigs, muscle cars, and some special vehicles including a drag racer and a hovercraft. It's an eclectic mix that feels a bit like Motorstorm's hodgepodge of vehicle types, though unfortunately none of the races have got the balls or the ovaries to mix things up to that degree. Some of these vehicle types are super fun. The buggies were my go-to for most of the game, a little twitchy but very maneuverable and a jack of all trades across every surface, while the dirt bikes were really enjoyable too. Kicking the back end out to slide around corners or immediately snap to a different direction was a blast, and they're also perfect for weaving through trees when looking for collectibles. Some of the trucks can be a real hoot and a holler too. I absolutely love this goofy motherfucker of a bus, it has no chill at all. Then you get to some of the other vehicles. Muscle cars, for example, have basically no grip, no traction. Honestly, I'm surprised they have tires at all. Road bikes feel as stiff and unresponsive as you may expect. I mean, I get it, they're not the most nimble of things, but the way they handle really does not suit the tight, narrow roads they're often forced to race on. And the quad bikes feel just horrible. Like, it's really hard to describe how these things handle, but they have the widest and slowest turning circle of all time, and the tiniest 1-degree corner is bound to send you flying off the track unless you slam the brakes down. And the quad bikes get used in so many races too. Like, these circuits have some pretty fun designs. Why do I have to use these little fuck asses in them? I want to use the Spider Wraith more. My beloved. He's my best friend, my handsome little soldier. I would die for him. My hometown boy. Each vehicle has its own unique stats, and most of them make sense. Like, okay, top speed, acceleration, durability, all that, that's self-explanatory. But then, peep this, you've got the asphalt and off-road stats. And these really complicate matters. On one hand, asphalt doesn't actually mean asphalt. Asphalt actually means any road marked on the map, and off-road means anything that isn't a road or dirt path. So these road bikes and muscle cars with full asphalt rating, right? You'd think they're only good on a normal ass road, but no, they're just as effective, if maybe slightly more unruly, on dirt roads as well. But their off-road rating is the lowest it can be, so if those wheels so much as detect a single blade of grass in the general vicinity, the car will slow down like it's hit a dang wall. Flip it around and a car with perfect off-road stats and crappy asphalt stats are good on any surface, including asphalt. They suffer no slowdown and no loss of handling on roads whatsoever. Generally speaking, they're not as fast, but the quickest off-road vehicles can go about 180 kilometers an hour, while the fastest road vehicles might top 210 if you catch them on a good day, so the trade-off is minuscule. And then there are the vehicles that are in the middle, 3 for each stat. In some cases, these vehicles are fine, but all too often are these vehicles just worse versions of those designed for road racing. They go off track and they lose absurd amounts of speed almost immediately, making these vehicles the worst possible choice whenever they're available in a race. I don't know, this just seems weird to me. Fuel is probably around 80 to 90% off-road and mixed surface racing and 10 to 20% road racing, so why bother with this arbitrary split? And why make it so that so many of these vehicles can't go off-road? Like, I'd say around half of the vehicles aren't that great at going off-road at all in the first place, which is stupid because most of the game is spent off-road, whether it's dirt roads or not. Oh, and not to mention that some of these vehicles are ugly as sin. Like, check out the Lucha Libre, or as I like to call it, Baby's first blender project. Coupled with the weird handling is the general physics, which most of the time they're fine, but then a little bit too often you'll hit a tiny little hole or a rock hidden amongst the overgrown grass and you'd have yourself some prime footage to slap the DuckTales moon theme on, upload it to Reddit, get 4 upvotes, then watch someone else named Big Chungus Farts repost it and get 27,000 upvotes. There's also a damage meter, but the game isn't very good at determining what's a heavy impact and what's an insignificant dent, as sometimes I can rip and tear through debris or land on my side and take no damage, but going down the side of a mountain just a little bit too fast results in a reset. Oh, and get used to this screen, by the way. Whether you're just getting reset or you're loading into or restarting a race, you're going to be very often reminded that yes, you are indeed playing fuel. Also, turn the music off and use YouTube or Spotify like I do, unless you want. Forever burned into your brain. The physics and arbitrary stat distribution are enough of a pain in the career mode, but they make things even worse if you're insane enough to tackle challenge mode. On the surface, it's a huge chunk of content. 10 challenges for each zone, totaling 190 extra events on top of the career mode's 72. But due to their occasionally insane difficulty spikes, they really showcase how awful the physics can be, and how atrocious the rubber banding AI often is. There are 10 different types of challenges, and most of them are pretty rudimentary. Basic races, timed sprints, checkpoint races, races. There's one where last place gets knocked out after every checkpoint. There's another where you have to get to the finish line by taking whatever route you want. It's nothing you haven't seen before. There's also Chopper Chase, where you follow a helicopter as closely as possible to the finish line as you can't see it on the map, but you also have to beat it across the line. These are usually pretty boring. And Seek and Destroy, where you chase down a number of opponents and tag them to win. Again, usually pretty boring, but there were a couple of times where they function like a fun little puzzle, where it's impossible to catch up to your targets just by following the GPS, so you have to survey the land and refer to your map to figure out the fastest possible route and method of attack instead. This sort of thing I would have loved to see more from Fuel, but it's rare that it does this, and it's rarer still that it does this effectively. Half the problem is that trying to take shortcuts usually requires you to drive down steep slopes that will total your car if you take them any faster than walking speed, or you'll have to dart through a thick forest, and I tell ya, weaving through trees in these vehicles, I'd rather astral project out of my body and float up my own arsehole. That's a thing raccoons can do, I swear. The other half of the problem is that because every time you enter a new challenge or career event, you get plunked down into an area you've likely never been due to the sheer size of the map. So unlike, say, Midnight Club 3, where the whole point of the game is to learn each city inside and out to find the shortest routes between each checkpoint, you don't get that feeling of, oh, I know this area, I'm gonna make this race my bitch, until you start repeating the same event. Nowhere is this more prevalent than the raids and endurance races, events that can be anywhere between 10 and 150 kilometers long. You look at the map and think, oh, the next checkpoint is here, I could easily cut through here, so you do that. But then you start hitting trees, and then you accidentally hit a rock and get thrown off a tiny incline in a funny way, and then halfway through your improvised route you think, maybe I just should have followed the GPS. So in the next endurance race, you do just that. You're casually decimating second place, and you're just cruising along for most of the race until the GPS takes you off-road and points you in the direction of a trench that you think you can jump over because it's kind of small before you fall in, are forced to reset, and oh wow, everyone's already caught up and you lose meters before the finish line. The challenges are such bullshit, dude. They start off fine, but around halfway through the game, suddenly you're dealing with time limits that demand perfection, AI that pull mushroom power-ups out of Mario Kart to overtake you right at the end of a 15-minute long event, and really shitty route design that feels less deliberate like the career events do and more like they were made with the game's race editor. But Remy, I hear you say with Cheeto dust spraying out of your mouth, just use a different vehicle if you're having so much trouble. But that's the thing, you can't. Each challenge is tailor-made for one specific vehicle, which isn't a bad idea on its own, but with how brutal these events can be, if you fail, you can't select a different vehicle and try a different approach, you just have to keep trying. Again, that would be fine if most of these challenges didn't stick you in vehicles that take critical damage when driving over grass, or if the time limits or AI weren't so strict, but that's how it is, so the only option you have is to just keep doing it over and over again until the game decides that the physics won't screw you over on your 14th attempt. Like this event, reach the end before the time runs out. Fair enough. But this event feels like it was made with a different vehicle in mind, because when you drift or touch the grass, you just lose all speed. And some of the roads are way too narrow to fit a monster truck, let alone one with a 50-50 asphalt off-road split. Or this one, a checkpoint race where I run out of time by the second checkpoint because A, the 0G is way too twitchy, B, it loses all speed off-road, C, a very necessary shortcut requires pinpoint precision, and D, you get to this really narrow part, which is hard enough on its own, but suddenly the car is somehow magnetically attracted to the wall, but counter-steering throws you straight off the edge. This doesn't feel like it was made for a buggy, it feels like you should be doing this on a dirt bike. But I can't, so I have no choice but to just keep trying. Slipping off the edge, losing speed because a dirt buggy can't handle going off-road apparently, getting fucked over by the twitchy handling, sitting through that loading screen over and over and over and over, and I need to lie down for 3 weeks. This is what I mean when I say I think Fuel has roped me into an abusive relationship. Despite the subpar physics and handling and the repetitive nature of its progression and exploration, I really like playing it. It's a game that I look at and I think, I have no idea why I like you, but it is what it is. And then some bullshit happens that makes me never want to play video games again. And then I come back a few days later and keep playing as if nothing had happened at all. Why? What the hell is it about this unflinchingly average and borderline infuriating racing game that keeps pulling me back? There are even still issues with Fuel that I haven't listed yet. There's no look back button, and the right stick pivots the camera around your vehicle like you're playing a third-person adventure game, which is absolutely not what you want in a racing game, and yet the D-pad is assigned to steering and the left and right bumpers go totally unused. A lot of vehicles also just straight up blow chunks and there's no way to improve them, which honestly, upgrades would have been really cool. Even better, make them a collectible alongside or instead of the Vista points. There are collectible liveries for each vehicle, but they only come in 3 colors each, and you can only use one of 10 colors for the base. 10 in this day and age. Microsoft Paint's default palette has more colors than that. I have more colors than that. It's 11, I counted. The sound design is atrocious. You can tell where the tire screeching sound loops. And some vehicles sound like they have two engines going at once, which sounds awful on some cars and almost kinda terrifying on others. Forget about Mr. X, let's make a game where this fucker chases you around in the dead of night. I would shit my jaw so fast. And no vehicle aside from a drag racer you can only use in one shitty challenge exceeds 220 kilometers an hour, while a lot of the early game vehicles have trouble surpassing 100. I've literally gone faster than that in my mum's old Nissan Nomad and at least half as fast trying to roll start the bloody thing at 7 in the morning. This game frustrates me on almost every possible level, from physics to progression to quality of life stuff. It may as well be screaming, Remy, you fool, you idiot, you utter buffoon, stop playing me, you little fuckhead, I'm shit, I'm not worth it, you feckless pissant, go play a good game, stinky. And yet here I am striving for 100%. I don't know, man, the racing's janky, but blasting along these bouncy-ass dirt roads and swerving around debris and abandoned trucks, it's fun. Racing through tornadoes is exhilarating. Chasing after all the collectibles in the open world is kinda chill. And yet, all those races and challenges and collectibles, it's asking a lot from the player for what I assume is basically no reward, but I've been enjoying coming back to the game every now and then and just knocking off more events and finding more collectibles. It's a game that felt like it was almost made specifically for me, like Asobo sat down and said, hey, let's make a game specifically designed for that weird raccoon guy who lives down under. They failed, this game really sucks in a lot of aspects, but I still want to play it, warts and all. I've found it. I found my Destiny 2, my Citus or Demo, my League of Legends. A game I know I shouldn't be playing as much as I do. A game I know isn't going to be worth putting so much time and effort into, but one I keep playing anyway. So yeah, it's shit. Stay well away from it.
Ayo, this is going to be a bit rushed. Sorry for the wait. Shit's been kind of difficult the past few months, but back into the groove now, hopefully. Next video is Square Enix gave me a copy for Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins, so that should be really interesting. And the 50th episode is coming up very soon, so hopefully people will enjoy what I have in store for that. But yeah, anyway, thank you to my patrons, Furball, Sofox, K, Damien Maxted, Nation McGaltail, Aetheric Ruby, Heathoot Skyet, Jayet, Johannes Anderson, Kurote the Kitsune, Leo Alex 50, Pear Basket, Philip Elk, Raindra, Run Fast There Smith, Sheepy, Scadius Grim, Squid Superstar, The Dervinator, and Zip, and all my other patrons as well.
Also, Chris Firebolt and CD Killer. Sorry, my mic is broken. Meow.
Thanks for sticking around, even though I've been a bit slow over the past few months. Oops. Getting back into the groove now. Got plenty of big things planned for the future, and hopefully you all will enjoy them. So yeah. Anyway, again, sorry for the rushed outro. You know, follow me on Twitter, Discord, pledge to Patreon, all that shit, and yeah, I will catch you guys all next time. Mwah.